And there was also a study I read, a case study when I was a freshman in college in psychology, and it was about a doomsday cult that said that the world is going to end midnight, but there's going to be a flying saucer land in my backyard at midnight Tuesday, and the people who were there will be saved. Well, at midnight, the saucer didn't come. So some people said this is a lot of baloney, and they left. 2 a.m. it didn't come. More people left. But most of the people stayed until the following morning. And the leader of the group said, here's what happened. Your show of faith saved the world. And the point of all this is, the more you invest in a belief, the longer you are going to hold to it, no matter how much factual information you come across.
On today's episode of Rise, Grind, Repeat, we talk to Virgil from Virgil Consulting. Talk about the history of PR and where it's headed. Let's dive right in. Virgil, thank you so much for joining on another episode of Rise, Grind, Repeat. I'm excited for this because, you have some background in entrepreneurship, but more so, you have a lot of history in the education side. You know, before this, I kind of worked over at the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College and helped with the digital marketing side there. And that was my full time, as this was a side hustle. So huge passion for education and transferring knowledge. And before we get too deep into that, I'd love to hear your background. We're getting a little bit, into your time in New York and the education side. So what's your story?
And what I would mention as a preface before I get into that is I did teach strategic communications for 4 years at ASU at the Cronkite School, and I would say that 95% of my students either wanted to go into corporate PR or agency PR, and the other 5% into not-for-profit, but usually with like animal rescue or some social service thing. I never came across a student in 4 years that wanted to go into university PR. And for me, that just turned out to be I happened into it, but it turned out to be a very rich and complex experience. So I would start by saying that I decided in graduate school, actually, I went to the University of Pennsylvania in political science and then went on to the Wharton Graduate School in marketing. And oddly enough, didn't like it. What I found is there's a difference between practicing it and studying it. And right now, Wharton School would require 5 years of professional experience before you even consider applying there. But I decided I wanted to be a novelist. I thought that would be, and still do think would be like the greatest occupation you could have. And I was supporting myself being a private school teacher, making almost no money whatsoever. And during the summer, I would crank out these novels on a typewriter, because this goes back a ways. And the third try, I thought I had really done it. And I got I read about New York literary agents in Time Magazine and picked one, sent her my manuscript, and she asked me to come to New York. And she said, there's pay dirt here now. Here's how to change it and do this and do that and send me the revised copy. And then she told me she could sell the hardback rights, the softback rights, and the movie rights.
Oh, wow.
I actually quit my job, moved from this small town back to my hometown of Philadelphia. And, the weeks went by and the months went by. I finally decided to give her a call. And when I told her who it was, she said, "Who is that again?" Yeah. Well, I'm still working on it. So I went to bed that night, and it was like a lightning bolt hit me in the middle of the night. She's never going to sell this book, which she did. I'm 29 years old. I have no career and I have no future. What am I going to do now? So I thought, what's the closest thing you can do to writing novels? You could become a newspaper reporter. And that's what I did. And I spent 7 years doing that. I did, which is, by the way, great preparation for going into at least the media relations part of PR. And but there were two issues for me, kind of long term. One is that if you're working at a major news outlet, unless you're extremely senior, you're working nights, weekends, possibly holidays. And so it's very hard to combine your professional life with a half-decent personal life. And then kind of the flashpoint that got me to think about leaving is the lack of civility in a newsroom as deadline approaches. People, you're in a room of 45, 50 people, and they're, what the heck does this mean? And why did you do that? And can't you spell? And why didn't you do this earlier? And so I got a telephone call. I was offered an opportunity to go back to my alma mater, the University of Pennsylvania, to work in the news bureau. And I would honestly say I didn't know what it involved. And this goes back to 1980, and there's been a whole transformation in university PR. They actually started as news bureaus. They actually worked almost as mini wire services. For someone like me who'd come from news, it was perfect. I just got to write stories. And if you look at any course catalog at a major university and look at the subjects that are taught, you can essentially write in almost any of those things, whether it's quantum mechanics or law or social work or education or public policy. You've got this wealth of information to work with. And it took me a period of time before I realized that you have to be more strategic. You have to work to support the brand and things of that sort. And one of my beliefs, and I actually did write a published novel on this, there's a Roman proverb that goes, destiny leads those who willingly follow and drags those who don't. So I ran into a rough part at Penn, my alma mater. I got passed over for a promotion. I was young enough to get my nose out of joint or something like that. And I took a job in New York at New York University, which turned out to be spectacular. If you're going to do media relations, public relations, you want to do it in New York. And it was really the big time. I had a really good run there after a couple of years. Once again, I did not have a career path. My boss wasn't interested in adding to her portfolio anything other than media relations. And actually, and I say this somewhat immodestly, that Columbia was the big dog in terms of universities in New York City. We beat them over a period of 5 years, and so they fired the person who was in charge of public relations and hired me. And I went in there and then ultimately came with Dr. Michael Crow from Columbia to ASU, which was another really good move. And I guess when I got into it all those years ago, what I could not have imagined is that I not only got to write and edit, but establish a newsletter, an alumni newsletter, a campus newspaper, 2 different alumni magazines. I actually made a video on my own hands. I managed a video unit. I got involved in government relations, community relations. Part of my portfolio was KAET, the PBS affiliate here in Phoenix, and then the Gammage Theater. I got into the field in 1980. I never realized the diversity and richness of what I would end up doing. I mean, not every PR job is that way, but if you advance through your career, it gets more than reading, writing, and editing things, getting involved in video and government relations and community relations and so many other things. And so I'm really thankful that I made that decision in 1980, not knowing exactly what I was getting into.
I mean, I think that happens more often than not. You kind of go in thinking what you're passionate about, and then, you look back 15, 20 years, whatever that may be, and go, wow, where I ended up was nowhere where I thought it would be, but I'm not disappointed in that overall journey. And it sounds like you're just huge and passionate about just overall communications. I mean, through video, through PR, through newspaper. I mean, why are you so passionate about communicating to communities, to people, whatever that may be? Where did this passion come from?
Wow. Well, that's a good question. I really haven't given any thought to that, except that I mentioned I wanted to be a novelist. I actually wrote my first illustrated book at the age of 9. Wow. It was called Strong Mouse, no relation to Mighty Mouse. But so I always had this kind of creative tendency. And then when I taught in private, when you teach in private school, at least when I did, you don't need any training. You just get up in front of a class and you talk, and maybe you're good, maybe you aren't. I think it was a combination of the wanting to communicate, the wanting to teach. So, I used to I've read a lot of books on quantum physics and the nature of reality and the nature of time, which basically is my real fascination.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd be at a football game and would start saying, "Do you understand how particle physics works? How one thing can be in two places at the same time?" So I think it was this need for creativity. I'm fairly good with a camera. I not only can't paint or draw, I can hardly write or sign my name. I can't sculpt. But I can write, and I can make films, which obviously can be very powerful if they're well done. So I think it's a combination of wanting to be creative, wanting to share what it is that I've learned, and then the final thing is that I like to think strategically, and I don't play chess, and I used to play fantasy football. But what I've enjoyed most, I guess, in my career is going to a job where there was an office that was not functioning the way it should. Mm-hmm. And basically, that's been my career. I've done it 4 times. And it's like, okay, how do I do this? How do I change how they operate? How do I change their philosophy? Do I have to change any personnel? Just what do we do? So in a sense, if you were to compare it to say football, I would be the general manager who would draft the team, hire the coaches, and install certain things, and then sit back and let it happen. And so at one point, when I was at ASU, and things could not have been going better, a friend of mine asked me to come up and view the situation at the University of Colorado Boulder. And it was an absolute disaster. And after reviewing the place and giving my opinion and riding to the airport, I was actually envious of him, because I was thinking, well, here are the moves I would make to get this particular office to be functioning properly.
That's awesome. And I mean, it's what are the commonalities that you've seen between those 4 situations where you came in and really optimized or revamped it? Because I think that's something that, part of it is the perspective, not being in the day-to-day, being able to come in and be an outside perspective would help. But I think especially right now, a lot of business owners are kind of going through, and how do I revamp, restructure to make my business more efficient? I mean, more digital, whatever that may be. But is there any certain commonality in terms of internal communication or organization?
Yeah, I think it was a friend of mine might have said the 3 Ps. It's people, procedures, and policy. And what I think has happened, and I'm not a historian of the field of communications, but if you go back, I guess even to the post-World War II period, when there were a lot of public information officers in the military, the whole country was mobilized. And these people then went into PR. And I think most schools, most people that got into PR or even television were trained as print journalists. Now, of course, you have programs in PR and marketing and broadcast news, but you didn't then. And so what happens, one of the problems is that people move over from the media into PR, and they keep acting the same way. It's a problem I've run into virtually every place I've been. So, for example, they would pick the low-hanging fruit. Okay, so when I was hired at NYU and I sat in my first staff meeting, and NYU was a university that had gone from almost closing its doors in the 1970s, actually moving its main campus. If you can imagine ASU moving from Tempe to everything to downtown Phoenix and selling the Tempe campus, this is what they did.
Wow.
I'm sitting there and they're saying, "Oh, so what are you working on?" "Oh, Kathleen Turner is coming to campus this week, and this band is going to be coming to campus this week." And it's like, well, wait a minute, we're not the Holiday Inn. We're not an entertainment venue. We are a university. Why are you not working on the things that will help support our brand? And one example, I mean, I knew this, but it was brought home to me in pretty stark fashion by a provost. I had one of my staff people come in and say, "Oh, I have a really cute story the New York Post is interested in." They were doing some renovation work in a subway in Greenwich Village, and they found a Coke bottle. It was an old Coke bottle. It's like, well, how old is this Coke bottle? Is it like 1940s, 1910, 1890? Can you get an archaeologist to talk to them about the Coke bottle? And you know what the provost said to me? He said to me, "We have the 3 most important archaeological digs in the Middle East, mostly in Iraq. You've done nothing on that." And now you're doing a Coke bottle in the subway. So I think there was this sense of a low-hanging fruit. There's also the sense, well, what does the media want? I have to make sure the media are happy. Well, yeah, that's true. But then I would have to say, who's paying you? I mean, who signs that paycheck? It's not the media. Another thing that perhaps people who work in a corporation might not know about a university. A university, if it's done right, is being run like an agency. So I would list our clients. The clients would be the president, number one person, the provost. But at ASU, there were 16 schools. And within those schools, you had departments, and then you have research institutes. And then in another sense, it's like staffing Congress. Okay, so you may have a Speaker of the House, but guess what? You have 450 tenured faculty members who are all important. And if you don't service them, they're talking to your boss. So one thing I've learned, for example, when I went into Columbia University, 80% of their stories came out of the School of Journalism. Well, the School of Journalism only paid 40% of their budget. And so what I had to teach them is, look, the School of Continuing Education is opening up an office on Broadway. They're about 25 years behind everybody else in terms of taking education to the business community. But you know what? For the next year, it's the single most important project they have, and so you have to focus on that. So those are a couple of things that I found straight across the board. I would add too that. So I worked at the University of Pennsylvania and Columbia University. They're both Ivy League schools. Academically, they're interchangeable, but one's in Philadelphia and one's 90 miles away in New York. And boy, when you're in New York, it's so much easier. You've got all the national. We had a Nobel laureate one year. Actually, the Nobel Prize was shared between a Columbia faculty member and one in Princeton. Now, Princeton's Princeton's probably 70 miles south of New York. Mm-hmm. We called a press conference. We had 32 news organizations. And I remember CNN coming in saying, yeah, we had a choice between going here or 90 miles down the New Jersey Turnpike. We weren't going to do that. So any school, including ASU, we had a big challenge in the fact that you're not local. There's really no national media there's an AP office and there's a PBS, an NPR affiliate, but you don't have the major news headquarters here that you would have in New York.
No, that makes sense. And I mean, a lot of great insights there. And I think the biggest thing there is that it seems like what happened is you went in and kind of reminded people what the ultimate vision is of this business. What are our business goals? What is it that we want to accomplish? And I think that, again, as you get in the day to day, you kind of lose that long-term vision on who are we trying to serve? What problems are we trying to solve? And you get more into, well, we're trying to appease this audience. And then it just takes taking a step back and really looking at it and steering that ship in the right direction.
Yeah. And that's, when I would apply for a job, and usually they would, in the latter part of my career, be in management jobs, associate vice president, vice president. That when I said, well, what do you say most to recommend yourself? I said, well, first of all, I understand the role my office is supposed to play in supporting the institutional goals. To me, that's number one, because if you don't understand that, then you really can't be very successful.
Yep. No, I couldn't agree more. And something you mentioned as you were going into that is one thing you noticed, you're no historian on the communications and all that, but one thing you did notice was when people were coming from radio and trying to get on TV, they were using the TV to really try and serve radio ads and not changing the communication based off of that particular channel. Is this something that has always been a trend? Because I'm big into digital marketing and working with people that have been in traditional radio and traditional TV. They try and take the same tactics and strategies and apply it to digital.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. In fact, I'm a Marx Brothers fan. And if you look at the first Marx Brothers movie, it was in the 30s, and it was a stage play they made into a movie. And you know what? They shot it as a stage play. They basically had a stationary camera, and that was like it. So I think that's part of it. See, and I kind of go both ways with that. I mean, I kind of left the practice of the field. Well, let me make this parallel first. I think I have a decent visual sense. And I would look at videos produced by Channel 8, and I would say, well, I think, the music is off, or visual. You need more of this, you need a better pacing. But I would not hire myself to be my own videographer. I don't have those skills. And I feel that way about social media and digital media. I have a good sense of it. I've actually taught it, but I've never done that. And I think what happens is that, so in my area, I managed media relations and publications and marketing and branding and social media and community relations and government relations, yet my hands-on experience was only in one of those fields. So I think for some of us, we're a little hesitant to use a field where you couldn't go in and replace your own staff member. But the other way I look at this, and I've been in the business a while, and when I started in 1980, we mailed out news releases. And we had actually we had 600 categories of media that we would send people to. I mean, for example, you would have local Philadelphia newspapers, business desk, education desk, art desk, all that. And what the office manager would do is she would run off multiple copies and store them of the envelopes. And then what you would do is you would write your news release. You'd get a release and you'd punch out the different places you want to get it. And then you had a staff of people that would stuff the news release into the letter and mail it. Well, then along comes, and it was Rutgers University. They were really ahead of the curve. They were faxing news releases. And then, of course, you could email news releases. And then, of course, you could put them on websites. And I've always felt, and I'm a bit of a Luddite. Those were the people that were against the Industrial Revolution. But I don't think you have to respect the format. But I still put a great deal of priority to the message. And maybe I feel like that's my specialty, and somebody can help me shape it for TV or whatever. I mean, for example, and I get overly concerned about this stuff. There's a new type of frozen food, and I live on frozen food. It's called Devour, and I see the packets in the store, but I've never seen a commercial. Last week, I saw the first television commercial. It was for macaroni and cheese, which is something I like, right? So there's a guy on the fishing, because it's called Devour. They want to bring fish into it. And so they take this package, open package of macaroni and cheese, and they have it floating on the water. And a guy pops out of the water and he grabs it. So all I can visualize is my macaroni and cheese is now wet. I mean, what made you think about this? And there's a Domino's pizza commercial where they talk about, well, now we've got takeout. And a guy walks out and he has a thing of pizza box and he throws it at the car like a frisbee. And it hits the window and it goes down. And all I can think of what a pizza looks like when all the cheese slides to the bottom, it's like, what makes you think that's appealing? So I focus so much on the message, and I certainly realize that there's different ways of using it. I think there's a tremendous opportunity in social media, particularly like in a university doing student recruitment, to start with some kind of content marketing. Because in my view, the average high school kid doesn't know what they want to do for their life's work. If they do know, they don't know what classes they have to take. And if they do know the classes, they don't know which institution to go to take them. So, I mean, that's an opportunity for something you can do where you can build to your marketing effort. The other thing I would point out, and again, I would say I'm not a real big techie. Did I lose you?
No, we're perfect.
Back in like 1999 or 2000, when I was at Columbia, I recognized how the web could circumvent the media. And so we actually created a C-SPAN of Columbia University. And in 1 year, we did 97 little 2 and 3 minute interviews of faculty on all kinds of topics, such as, the new group of leaders in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
We also then videoed 125 in one 9-month period, symposia and conferences, and had them on our website. And the average conference would get, maybe 2,000 viewers, which is not as much as C-SPAN, but if you're doing 125 of them, and most of the and you can tell that most of those people are coming from other Ivy League schools. That's tremendously important. So usually with the media, you have this two-step process. You've got to first communicate and cultivate with the media, then you want to go through them to another audience. And I think what digital media does is give you an opportunity to go straight to the person that's the end product, the end user.
Yeah, it's the direct to consumer essentially. And I love everything that you said. I mean, the whole content marketing and what is it that you want to do was a huge proponent of that and trying to get that going at the teachers college. But, kind of a lot of the things that you brought up with, the direction of commercials and whatnot doesn't really communicate the right message. I think a lot of people do understand or appreciate that you do need to communicate what you do as a business, what solutions you bring to the table. But I think everyone always stumbles on okay, well, how do I do this now? Do you have any tips on how a business or someone could do that successfully to where they're not, miscommunicating what it is that they do, and not really get what it is they're trying to communicate across?
Yeah, I'll tell you how I would go about it, and sort of what I did at ASU. And let me say, just to give you some background about, and you know some of this from your time at the teachers colleges, but there are hundreds of universities. If you include colleges and community colleges, I think there are 5,000 colleges and universities. And some of them are extremely expensive, be the most important, biggest expenditure you make in your life, and probably the most important. And if you were to go back 50 years ago, 75 years ago, 100 years ago, who would be the top corporations? I mean, you wouldn't have Google, you wouldn't have Amazon, you wouldn't have Microsoft. Go back 100 years, you still have Harvard, Princeton, and Yale.
Mm-hmm.
So in the higher education space, it's really difficult to move up. And it's really difficult to get a different message. I mean, I watch a lot of college football, and I watch the halftime things like, your future starts here. Be all you can be. So what I would suggest, and what I did at ASU, we took 4 months to come up with the new brand, is to talk to people, everybody you can, and senior administrators, mid-level administrators, faculty, students, members of the community, alumni, political leaders. First of all, you have to have a sense of what the place. What are you?
Mm-hmm.
And so the president of Columbia University, who was also, I believe, the president of Rice University at one point, described his job as, it's my job to figure out what a university is and make it more of what it is. I would say his job should be make it more of what it can be.
Yeah.
And so that's what you want to do. You want to find out. So one experience I had when I was at the University of Pennsylvania, it was considered the 14th best university in the country, and it wanted to be Stanford. And you know what? I couldn't make it Stanford. It's not Stanford. Then I would go to New York University, and their president, and he was an interesting guy because he was really kind of he wasn't a typical academic. He was from Brooklyn and proud of it, and used to say, I used to play in Irish trios all over the town, And he would say, and we did videos in, if you want to go to school in a cornfield, don't even look at us. Go to Michigan, go to Kansas. If you want to go to school, up against the world. If you want to go to a place that doesn't have any grass, but its village, its campus is Greenwich Village, and the most exciting city in the world, then come to New York. And that was right. You can't appeal to everybody. You can't be what you're not. So figure out what it is you are. So you want to find a really good way of figuring out what it is, how you can develop that, and then how can you express it. And I think the only real issue is that how do you differentiate yourself? So to give you an example where we were able to do it. As I said earlier, the University of Pennsylvania and Columbia University, two Ivy League schools, they're both about 270 years old. They're both excellent. They both have great research. What differentiates them? Well, the difference is Columbia's in New York. And also they have something called a Great Books curriculum. So their entire recruitment video was on the Great Books in New York City.
That's awesome. I mean, everything that you just mentioned there, I mean, it's kind of to tie it back to small businesses and whatnot. A lot of creative gets done and just let's get it to market without taking the time to research who are we, what problems are we solving, and who are the people that this involves, because then you're kind of just producing off of assumptions rather than what people actually want. Right. How do they perceive you? Is this an actual problem? And I think that's a big missing piece when it comes to a lot of marketing strategies is that research and validation on if we go to market with this, is this going to be perceived well? Are we going to communicate what we're trying to accomplish and get that across properly?
Right. I mean, when I was in graduate school, there was a cookware company. We had a special project. There were some of us, and the sales had fallen off from like 30 million during the Great Depression, 30 million a year, to 5 million in 1968, which is quite a drop off when you consider inflation. And we showed. I mean, the company didn't do this. We showed their product to their consumers. A panel of consumers, and they didn't like it. There were a lot of problems with it, and I don't think they had ever done that. And then I think too is testing the messages. Are people getting what it is that you're doing? I think, and I realize too when you look at some of the stuff that's on TV now, it's so extreme because how do you get attention?
Yeah.
Right. So how do you balance getting someone's attention, talking about your brand or marketing advantage, and doing it in a compelling way? And that's what I think is really difficult.
Yeah. All as that attention span is decreasing. So it's like, how do you do all that? And used to be 30 to 60 second spots. Now it's 15, and YouTube now has 6-second spots. I mean, it's, having the ability to do that is where there's tons of white space. But I mean, do you have any tips on how someone can consolidate that or figure out how to do that in such a short time?
I think the only two things you can do, you can do a lot of research. And that, starting internally and working out. And then you need to test your different approaches and then find out which one may work best. I keep thinking of higher education. It's a really tough space to be in.
Oh, yeah.
Mainly because, I mean, there are 4,000 to 5,000 brands, and they're all offering English and marketing and biology and things like that. But I'll tell you, believe it or not, this is going to sound crazy, but a show that I've enjoyed. I don't like reality television, but I like the show Bar Rescue. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
I love it.
And it's this marketing thing. Okay, so there's a guy who has a bar with a golf simulator. And it's like, well, why do you have that? Well, I like golf. Well, that's not the point. It's not. And then there was a hookah lounge in Omaha, Nebraska. And the tavern comes in and says, in the whole town, there are like 3,000 people that smoke hookahs. But I like hookah. Well, you're not your own customers. So I think what you have to guard against, you have to guard against the assumption of what you like, other people will like. I also, what I found in media relations is what I would call the baby pictures syndrome that people have. I would say, at the time, my son was about 6 months old and he was really very handsome. And I'd say, you see this baby picture? Isn't that like the greatest picture you've ever seen? I don't think I can sell it to the New York Times. I mean, it's important to me, but it's not to somebody else. Mm-hmm. So you will have clients that say, you know what? It's the 75th anniversary of our School of Social Work. Yeah? Why should anybody care about that? Or there would be an alumni event to which you're not invited. So I think it's like getting out of yourself, I guess my bottom line would be, if you actually do have a competitive advantage of some sort, you can do it. If you don't have a competitive advantage, then you're really stuck. If you're one more coffee shop, if you're one more sandwich shop, if you're one more university, then you have to back down. And then again, one of the things about marketing, and this is certainly true in places like the automobile industry, and this was a big deal back in the post-World War II era, when the styles of cars began to change. How do you change the product? So, for example, I'm affiliated with a digital marketing firm in Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
They're putting a proposal for a college in the panhandle of Florida. Now, I've been in the field for 35 years. I never heard of the school. And in Florida, you have a lot of, I think Florida is right after California in number of schools. And the only thing I could think of is, look, you've got to change your focus. You're in an area where there are a lot of military bases. And so what you need to do is you need to construct programs that focus on that. And they would be not only your lead, but maybe your bread and butter.
I absolutely love that, because it's, when I started in digital marketing, it was helping with Google Ads and all that. And it was the ugly baby conversation, and it's we're driving traffic, but it's not converting. And it's like, yeah, you go back to the website, you love it, but it's tough to have that conversation because you love it, but what your customers see is something different. And I think to your point on the differentiators, it's, if you're having a hard time figuring out how to clearly say that in 30 seconds or whatever that may be, maybe it's not that it's the communication, it's that you haven't dug deep enough to figure out how you're different. And then it might be going back to the drawing boards on that, which then could be, do we change our products? Do we change our business models? Which, a lot of people are going through at this moment.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That if you can't express it, maybe you haven't hit upon it.
Yeah, no, I agree. And, been talking a lot about the history and everything on communications. With everything evolving with technology and everything, what do you see the future of communication looking like? It's not getting any easier to try and reach everyone on all these different devices and platforms and whatnot. What does the future look like for communication?
Wow. I just saw something this morning where, and I'm not going to remember the name of what it is. You might know it, but AOC, Alexandria Ocasio, she did a fundraising event yesterday online. Maybe it's called Ticket, something like that, but where you can have conversations and play video games. So I think what's happening is this great fragmentation of things where it's still where it is going to get more difficult. For example, there was a period of time in the 1950s when there were only 3 television networks. And if you're going to introduce Elvis Presley or introduce the Beatles, you did the Ed Sullivan Show at 8 o'clock on Sunday night on CBS. Well, you still have 3 major news networks now, cable networks. You still, I can't find a New York Times, a print. I have to read it online because Starbucks doesn't care. And one of the things I did, and this is what I worry about, I have a theory of media relations that's based on the capital campaign fundraising approach that universities use. So if you're going to have a fundraising campaign, you're going to have categories. You're going to have $1,000 donors, $50,000 donors, $100,000. And if you're lucky, you're going to have $100 million donor. Well, how many $100 million does it take to have $100 million? 1. And ASU got that from Mr. Fulton, and they have gotten 2 $50 million gifts. Okay, how many $1,000 gifts do you need to equal 100 million? The answer is 100,000. And what I found in working at universities, that the staff were working on the $50 stories. And so what I tried to do is I tried to work on the $100 million story. And I got one for NYU. That is an institutional profile, well displayed in a national publication. And we got a 2,400-word story on the front page of the New York Times above the fold.
Wow.
4 pictures and 2 graphs. I heard from people all around the country. Are you going to be able to do that again? I don't know. And I'll tell you the other thing that worries me, which I've been thinking about a lot. I thought one of the things we might talk about is why PR has such a bad reputation. But I'm really worried now about what's happened on the political front. That and it's driving me crazy. There's so much lying, so much deflection. I sit there and I listen to these interviews and I say, please just answer the question. You've got all these negative ads, right? And so it's not only, so the people who are in the advocacy business, the people who are trying to convince you of something, it's PR people, it's marketers, it's lobbyists, and it's politicians. But now it's also the news media itself. And so if you watch MSNBC versus Fox or Fox versus MSNBC, you're in two different universes.
Yep.
And so there's now this absolute difficulty in getting somebody to believe anything that's not from their news source, from their tribe. That's the political world. I don't know what it's going to be like in the future. But is that going to carry into other areas too? Is there going to be just a complete distrust of what other people say? I mean, this has always kind of been the case, that people want to believe what they would like to believe. I think there was a study done back during the Bush administration that every time you challenge somebody about a political belief, you won't convince them. You get them to dig deeper to support their presentation. And there was also a study I read, a case study when I was a freshman in college in psychology, and it was about a doomsday cult that said that the world is going to end midnight, but there's going to be a flying saucer land in my backyard at midnight Tuesday, and the people who are there will be saved. Well, at midnight, the saucer didn't come. So some people said this is a lot of baloney, and they left. 2 a.m. it didn't come. More people left. But most of the people stayed until the following morning. And the leader of the group said, here's what happened. Your show of faith saved the world. And the point of all this is, the more you invest in a belief, the longer you are going to hold to it, no matter how much factual information you come across. So, so I think now it'll be very interesting to see what happens in 2021. I mean, just when you look at something as serious as the pandemic, you either believe it's killed 220,000 Americans and may kill twice as many more, or you believe it's a media thing. If you can believe something that is so important to your health, what are you going to believe from a marketer?
Yep. Yeah. And I mean, how do you think something like that gets solved? I mean, I don't know if there is a solve for it, but I totally hear where you're coming from. It's and it's tough. And I mean, I think that there's going to be more. I think there is more wanting of a kind of a neutral party or a neutral news source. And I think there's going to be a growing trend of that, where you're going to have maybe little shops pop up that deliver unbiased news or whatever that may be. I mean, but are people actually going to listen to it? Because I totally agree. It's you can have a headline, and whether it's positive or negative is all dictated based off of that person telling the story.
But here's a problem I think you had, and I ran into this when I was teaching, and I was teaching strategic communications, basic PR, and I did not want to get into politics. But the most important PR person, best PR job in the country, is being the president's spokesman. And the first thing Sean Spicer said was that this was the biggest crowd ever to attend an inaugural. And the news media presented pictures showing that wasn't. So the problem is, if the Washington Post is correct, how do you not point that out? Do you say, well, in the interest of being neutral, I'm not going to tell you that wearing a mask really works, because there's some people who think that wearing a mask doesn't work. But, what I would say on an individual level is that it is possible for an individual PR person to have a lot of credibility. And that means, I think, number one, you have to work for an organization that is ethical and credible. And then they have to allow you to do that. And Columbia University is a very ethical institution, but there was a day when the executive vice president told me to lie to the media. I wasn't going to do it. I went to my boss and I said, if she forces me to do that, I'm quitting. He said, I'm going to quit with you. We went in, we took one more chance talking her out of it, and we succeeded. So what we need are more John McCains who will say what they believe to be true, regardless of the consequences. And that's going to be a long haul where you can get back to people believing first in individuals and then later on in institutions. Because, if you go back to the 50s, if you read any books on the 50s, anything the president said, people believed.
Mm-hmm.
Anything people in authority said, they believed. It was a completely different world. So I think that what's going to happen is a lot of individual behavior has to be changed. And then maybe you're right. You start with short, small shops that will be honest. It'll change it. By the way, I've always been curious about this. The strangest advertising campaign I've ever seen was about 4 or 5 years ago when Domino's Pizza did a series of focus groups where people tore their product apart. It was like, the crust is awful. It's the worst sauce I've ever had. Mm-hmm. It was like ketchup. And they did this for 6 months. And then they came back and with a new product. And they went back to some of the same people. And I don't know how well that worked out for them. But that would really be, something that would get us on the right track. And kind of related to that, one of the things I've personally never understood, and you could look at the Boy Scouts, the Catholic Church, 5 or 6 major universities, and probably Boeing, the Boeing Corporation, that you have a problem somewhere in your organization. It isn't organizational wide. It could be one person, 2 people, could be a group of people, could be a bad product, it could be whatever. And for fear of getting bad PR for that little thing, you cover it up and you let it go on. And then what happens is the whole place comes down. So you have the presidents of Baylor University, Michigan State University, Penn State universities, all having to lose their jobs because they wouldn't tell the truth about sexual misconduct within their universities. And so that is another example, I think, of where people just sort of have to be honest and have credibility.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I mean, it goes back to how I grew up and what my dad taught me is that if you tell a lie, it's only going to get deeper and deeper and deeper. And it's just, couldn't agree on all fronts. And before we kind of wrap it up, I'd love to touch on what you mentioned on PR having a bad name. I'd love to get your thoughts on that. I mean, we don't dive into the PR side a whole lot, but there is a lot that we're trying to work with PR firms on because there's a lot of synergy between PR and SEO and digital and all that type of stuff. But
I think there's a misunderstanding of what it is you're supposed to do. In my class, I would compare it to a law case where you have a defense attorney and a prosecuting attorney, and both are supposed to give the best defense they can without breaking any rules. You don't hide evidence. You don't let people perjure themselves. And that to me is what PR is to make the best case you can for your client or employer without stretching the truth, without lying. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of cases where there's more than one perspective. But I think a lot of people just think that your job is to spin, deceive, convince. And then I think you do have people who are unethical in the field. But then when I mentioned earlier, I think maybe the biggest problem right now is that PR people get lumped into this category of people who are advocating and trying to convince you of things. And that includes advertisers and marketing people. And not that advertising isn't part of marketing, but it's what we see most. And then you have politicians and others. And so it's like everybody is trying to convince you of something all the time. the way I think you need to approach it is you have to be you just have to be as ethical and useful as you possibly can. So, for example, back in I have professional friends who are in the news media, and I know that if there's a problem, they're going to hit me. And that's their job. And they also know that if there's something I'm not supposed to tell them because it's confidential, I am not going to violate that confidentiality. And so I started a media dinner in New York City in 1988 to bring together university presidents and members of the national news media to discuss issues in higher education. And what was different about it was we weren't lecturing them. It wasn't a podium. It wasn't a presentation. They were full and equal partners in this conversation. And this is now 33 years. I did a virtual one in September. We actually had 45 media around the country in it. And these are people I've been dealing with 12 years, 20 years, and longer. And so I think you need to have that that kind of relationship. I know there was a fellow I know who was like marginally associated with my family, who wasn't the smartest man in the world. He was an aluminum salesman. And he was so kind of challenged that his wife, for the first week, had to go with him in the car and show him his route. He was incredibly successful because he was honest. And so I don't think you can, and I think for any individual PR person or firm, there's a great advantage to that. You know, I make some weird connections in my life. There is was a frozen food company in Philadelphia called Mrs. Paul's Kitchen. And they made crab cakes and they made fish sticks, and it was a family-owned business. And I saw the owner on television one night, and they said, "Well, what's your secret to success?" And he said, "Well, this is what we've done at Mrs. Paul's. We have taken a business in which it's easy to shortchange the public. We can put second-rate fish in there, we can put filler in there, but we don't. We give them an A1 product, and we could get away with not doing it." I thought, there's a lesson in PR. You could spin people, and you could also tell them the truth.
Yeah, and the truth is always what's going to come back and generate the results that you want. I mean, that at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to. This has been great, and as we kind of wrap this up, I mean, lots of learning. I mean, there's a lot that I've learned through this. I mean, if there's someone that's trying to figure out how to just communicate just better with their audience, I mean, what are the biggest piece of advice you'd have to give to them?
I would say that if it's it depends on which part of the communication. All right, so you basically have got, obviously, any communication's got two pieces, and the first is what's the message, and the message has to do with what I was talking about earlier. Which is making, what's your competitive advantage? Why are you different? How is it fact-based? How can you express it in a creative and concise way that will have impact? The other thing is, what channel are you using? For 10 years, 12 years, I was on the board of the Urban League. And the Urban League, it's a group that fosters diversity. And most of their members are 40, 50, and 60. And most of their fundraising comes from an annual dinner that they have where they sell tables, and an annual golf outing that they have. They didn't have a marketing person, so they decided to hire a digital marketing person. I said, well, wait a minute. I mean, who is that geared to? You're talking about corporate executives who are going to buy tables and golf courses. So you have to know, just like I mentioned AOC with this, thing she did last night online, you have to know what channel your audience reaches. So, and whether or not the channel is appropriate to the message. So I think you have to look at those two things, and it's always doing a certain amount of research inside and outside, and then testing it to see what you come up with. And I think certainly, and my son's a software engineer, and my daughter-in-law is a digital marketing person. The great advantage is there. You can know everything, right? You can know who's looking at your stuff. who's moving on to the next page, who's converting, where they tune out. And so there's an enormous advantage in that. And I guess the final thing I would say, taking from science, is somebody once was asked, some great scientist, I don't know who it was, how do new scientific theories take hold? And he said, it's when the people that hold the old theories die out. And I think what you have to realize now is that it's a youth country. The youth are if you look at the political agendas right now, if you look at the political world, what they would say is, like in the state of Arizona, it's most of the majority of kids in high school are Hispanic. So if you're in politics or if you are in marketing, what does that tell you? What do Hispanics? I mean, they're a market as it is now. Mm-hmm. How much of what you should do should be in Spanish language? How much of it should be targeted to a Hispanic population in English? And if not now, what in 5 or 10 years? So you have to look at the future, and you need to be prepared to change.
I absolutely love every piece of that, and I couldn't agree more, especially with the amount of data and analytics that we have, and we have a little acronym here, ABT, which is always be testing. And although none of us are great copywriters, through testing we can hone in on that message, but there's an abundance of opportunity in figuring out that how to land on that message through data and whatnot.
So there was I'll tell you one more quick story. When I was in graduate school taking communication theory, what they would do is they took two students up to the blackboard, and there was a divider between them, and then they would show one student a picture of a tree and say, "All right, now you talk without that person looking at it. You talk the other person into drawing that tree." Right? Never happened, except somebody said, excuse me, would you walk around the divider and come and look at the tree? And so when you communicate, you know what you're supposed to say. You're not a test of that. You already know. You can't get it wrong. You need at least one other people to tell you if you're even in the right universe.
Mm-hmm. That was great. And Virgil, thank you so much for the time today.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
This has been great. I mean, if there's anyone that wants to reach out and connect with you, I mean, how could someone find you?
Yeah, my email is my name at Yahoo. So it's Virgil, VIRGIL RENZULLI at yahoo.com. I'm glad to talk to anyone.
Awesome. Thanks so much again for the time.
Take care.